Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lori, Treasurer of NJPHIPAC, NJ Public Health Innovation Political Action Committee. Today, I'm joined by Board Member Melanie Dragone. We're excited to introduce you to Congressman Chris Smith. If this is your first time tuning into a PAC chat, welcome back. Welcome. If you've been with us before, welcome back. We launched NJ5PAC to give you, our community, the opportunity to meet key political players and influential people in our state who share our determination to protect and preserve our individual health choices and who ultimately will help us to get this state and country back on track. After all, public health is and can only be the product of the personal health of every single man, woman, and child in the community. When our elected officials respect the health of each of us individually, they'll be cultivating the health of all of us as a community. Now I'm going to pass it over to Melanie to elaborate further on who we are and review our endorsement process.
Thanks, Lori. Since we are discussing endorsements today, I just want to make one note for our viewers that the NJ5PAC endorsement process was developed with a set of standards and integrity. Every endorsement we make requires at minimum that the candidate complete and submit the NJ5PAC survey and participate in an in-depth interview with the board of directors. Other factors and considerations are their prior voting records of the candidate if they have one, their public positions or statements on the matters that affect our mission, and more. Ultimately, the NJ5PAC standards are to endorse candidates with transparency, integrity, and measurement without bias, so that when you see the NJ5PAC Gold Seal endorsement, the New Jersey voter can be confident that this is the best candidate for our collective mission.
Thank you, Melanie. Without further ado, I have the pleasure of introducing Congressman Chris Smith.
Lori and
Hi.
Melanie, nice to see you both. How are you?
Nice to see you.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you
me
for
on.
joining us. Over the course of his career, Congressman Smith has sponsored a variety of bills. His major areas of interest are improving healthcare for veterans, expanding medical research, and combating human trafficking. District 4 encompasses parts of Mercer, Monmouth, and Ocean counties. So it's great to have you. On behalf of the PAC board, we want to extend our congratulations on this endorsement and thank you for publicly taking a stand on these important issues.
Lori, thank you so very much. And I'm very, very grateful for the endorsement and for, most importantly, the great work that you do in the field in informing, motivating individuals, as well as informing families about what their rights are. So thank you for that, because I think we're all in this together. And we're in some very, very trying times at the state level as well as at the federal level. So you couldn't be more important at a most opportune time than right now. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. You've spoken with us at length on so many of these issues, and we were very impressed with a lot of what you had to say. So we're happy to showcase you to our community and have them hear from you. So we're excited to introduce you and allow our viewers to get to know you more and how you've worked through your career to protect and preserve health freedom, among many other things, and continue to plan to do so. So let's jump right in and get started with our first question. You've been a U.S. representative for 41 years. Can you start out by telling our viewers a bit about yourself personally and in your profession, as well as politically?
I'm a Republican. I've been in Congress, like you said. I'm in my 42nd year, but 41 years have been completed. I'm married, I have a wonderful, wonderful wife named Marie, who we've been married 45 years. Matter of fact, I proposed to her right nearby. I'm in Colts Neck over at the jetty around the 5th Avenue at Belmar. We have 4 children and 7 grandchildren. And so that to me, that's the core of my life, my family, my faith. I am a Catholic and I believe very strongly in faith. I respect everybody's faith. I've actually written 4 religious freedom laws, not bills, laws, because I do believe that people ought to have the right to practice their faith as he or she believes they ought to. And I work on human rights, both domestically and internationally, on a variety of issues. You mentioned the trafficking. I've authored 5 major laws, including the landmark Historic Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which is our domestic and international trafficking law. It's a whole of government approach. It took me about 3 years to get it passed. There are a lot of people who didn't want it, felt it was a solution in search of a problem, and how they were proven wrong. And now we have a response that emphasizes prevention of trafficking, protection of victims, and prosecution of the traffickers. There have been thousands of prosecutions using that federal law domestically here in the United States. And of course, we've inspired other countries to pass similar ones. And added to that, we also admonished states to pass similar laws so that there will be more prosecutors and more eyes and ears trying to mitigate this horrific commodification of women for sale through human trafficking. So it's labor and sex trafficking. So it has made a difference. I've served as chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee. I've served as chairman of multiple human rights panels in Washington, including the China Commission. Now ranking member because we are in the minority. I've served as the chair and as well as the it's a bicameral group called the Helsinki Commission. Everybody knows about NATO. Very few people know about the Commission on the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe, or OSCE. The OSCE is for human rights, democracy, and the like in all 57 countries, sadly, including Russia, which now our total preoccupation is what they're doing to the Ukrainians. I chair several health caucuses. I founded the Autism Caucus, the Spina Bifida Caucus, the Alzheimer's Caucus, and what we do, and others, and what we do is mobilize people and get people across the aisle as well to all join in and trying to promote all things relative to autism or Alzheimer's and the like. And I've written 4 laws, and you'll be pleased to know I was inspired by 2 parents, and this is why your work is so critical too, because we do hear what you've got to say, and it prioritizes issues for all of us. But Bobby and Billy Gallagher of Brick, New Jersey, came into my office in Whiting in 1997 and said, "We think we have a prevalent spike of autism in Brick Township." No one believed it except them and me and my wife, because my wife is a partner in all things, and my staff. I have great staff. So we organized for major informational meetings. We brought up the CDC, who weren't spending anything, $287,000 a year on their whole program for autism. Are you kidding me? And I remember one of the CDC people came up to me, and we had a big meeting in Brick High School, and I was talking about thimerosal and whether or not that was a contributing factor to autism. She put her finger up like this and said, "Don't go there, Congressman." I said, "We go wherever the science takes us to take off the table what might be a contributing factor and to find out what is the triggers, what are the triggers for autism or any other sickness or disease." But I'll never forget that. It was at Brick High School. And it was like, look, I don't get told what to do like that. I respect your credentials, and she had considerable credentials, and I respect, the work you do. But frankly, I'm not buying it that we just don't do anything on autism because you think you have it well in command. What got me the most, and I think I mentioned this in one of our earlier meetings, was when all these parents came out for a review of literature, and they were asking questions. Hands were going up, and they're saying, well, "What about the study in Tokyo, the study in Finland, or all over the world?" They said, "Oh, we never heard of that one." They're writing it down. I said, "Houston, we've got a problem. They're not really working this issue at all." So I wrote a law. This is CDC I'm talking about. I wrote a law, and I wrote 4 of them now. The Autism Cares Act is the most recent, and is a very, very significant effort to try to help those with autism. And just one sidebar, and I think I may have mentioned this before, but I actually wrote and I'm prime author of the Cord Blood Stem Cell Transplantation and Research Act, which takes cord blood stem cells and uses them for transplantation. Now, a lot of people know about it. I remember, Melanie, you mentioned saving cord blood and how important that is. But when I first started this back in the late 90s, and then finally introduced the bill in 1990, it took 5 years to get enacted. People were in disbelief. What do you mean? The afterbirth is teeming with life-enhancing stem cells that are very, very usable because they're not rejected by the body when they are transplanted. And we got the bill passed in 2005. I did it again in 2012, and it has been a magnificent success in helping to cure and mitigate diseases from leukemia to now even some hope on HIV-positive individuals. There's one breakthrough on that just recently.
Thank you so
And we've
much
also
for
had,
all of that.
oh,
A
I
lot
think
of people
I
in our
guess it went out too long, but
community,
yeah.
a lot of people in our community have, have kids with autism, and just putting the spotlight on that is great. And not only doing that, but taking steps to get some results, to get some
Yes,
answers
we are
and some
trying.
treatments. And we appreciate that.
Yes.
So my
So
whole
Congressman,
yes,
I have,
Melanie.
I have the next question. In your many years of service, you have addressed, as you just alluded to, various health issues in numerous bills and hearings and laws and policies. Can you highlight some of your efforts, and can we focus on or start with the Lyme's disease
Oh,
and
sure, yes.
how you started that journey in the early 90s and how you were able to move legislation and really help the people who are affected by Lyme here in the country?
Thank you so very much for the question. In 1992, at Wall Township, Pat Smith, who then and now runs the Lyme Disease Association of America, great website if you want to check it out, the Lyme Disease Association, and a pioneer, and has had family members suffer from Lyme herself. She came to one of my town meetings and put up her hand and said, Congressman, what are you doing on Lyme disease? I said, not much. We had lunch, and I've been working on it ever since. I actually traveled down and met with CDC and NIH that year. We met with all the top docs, and we got nothing but subterfuge from them. Claire Farragher, who was an assemblywoman who had Lyme disease, traveled with us along with Pat as we made our presentations. And they were just, there's no such thing as chronic Lyme, doesn't exist. If you think you still have it, you got something wrong with your head. It was a very eye-opening, non-scientific exchange between people who are suffering from it and knew a lot about it. So I introduced legislation. I got one passed into law to help nearby Fort Dix, where a lot of soldiers were bivouacking, would be out in the field with their National Guard unit, would go back to Illinois, wherever it might be, and wonder why they were then manifesting all the telltale signs of Lyme disease. So we did a very good recon and intervention amendment that was accepted for the Department of Defense. But the big bill I had was the Lyme Disease Initiative of 1998 that would establish a blue ribbon commission with Lyme literate parents and Lyme literate doctors on board to pierce all the myths that are out there, including that somehow chronic Lyme doesn't exist. Dr. Fauci, of all people, was a known adversary on that. Chronic Lyme doesn't exist. Take a month of doxycycline, maybe just 2 weeks even, and you're cured. And that's not true, as we know, particularly if you don't catch it right away. A lot of people don't see the bullseye and somehow it evades any detection. Find out what is wrong with me. Why the brain fog? Why the other problems? Why are my joints hurting like crazy? Well, it's because you got a spirochete coursing through your entire body and causing all of these problems. So we finally, and it took years, I got it into the 21st Century Cures Act because I could not get it passed as a separate bill. It was opposed by people like Frank Pallone. Matter of fact, he had guaranteed and told Pat Smith from her group, yep, we'll mark up Smith's bill, and then reneged on it. And as a result of that, we lost several years of not getting the bill passed. 21st Century Cures Act comes up, and we got it in as a separate disparate provision. This commission met and issued a landmark study on how terribly we have funded Lyme research, that we do not have a therapeutic, we do not have a really good way of detecting. Yes, there's iGenesis, which I mentioned, and some have used that. It's accurate, very expensive, but no real intervention and nothing being done to mitigate ticks, which are carrying not just Lyme, but a whole host of co-infections throughout the country, but particularly in New Jersey and the Northeast. So the good news is that was the game changer. And in all candor, it was Azar, the HHS secretary under President Trump, and I met with him several times, and he was an absolute true believer in following where the science is. And the science says, we have a problem. 10 to 20% of the people in the country have chronic Lyme. They don't know it, and yet they're being treated for fibromyalgia and a lot of other things, because it is often called the great pretender, because its symptoms manifest in a way that doctors make. Physicians, that was another thing that Azar and others were able to bring out, are often uninformed about Lyme disease, grossly uninformed. And part of that is that Lyme was treated and dismissed with such disdain for so long. It used to be, and still is probably in some places, but in New Jersey it's not anymore, that if you were a very aggressive Lyme literate doctor, you could lose your license. And people throughout the country, doctors, lost their licenses by being aggressive in their treatment to try to get rid of this through antibiotics and the like. So we are really in a very potentially good place where we can find cure. We're not there yet. It's just a cocktail of drugs and the like that are used to, again, lessen it. Most people who have chronic Lyme for a long time go into remission, not into cure. But we are making progress. We also got passed, I introduced a bill called the Tick Act, which again put more money into research and more money into helping local communities like Monmouth, Ocean, and others who have an endemic problem with Lyme to do more locally to mitigate the tick population and also, again, to try to get people into a situation where they're getting the best available medical care. So that's an issue that I've worked on for years. I chair the Lyme Disease Caucus. I formed it. And we've been working very, very hard over the years to try to make a difference on it. And COVID kind of put a little dent, it did, on some of the basic research that we were looking to do, because everything at HHS kind of like pivoted towards COVID-19.
Everything's about COVID now.
Yes, and it did do damage to those efforts. Another thing that a lot of people don't realize is that if you get COVID, and I asked Fauci this by letter and by contacts, other ways, is Lyme disease a underlying condition that could be exacerbated by COVID? And what happens? Well, we know from a lot of anecdotal stories that people who have had COVID also had Lyme. That a lot of the Lyme disease symptoms came back with a vengeance, and that's very, very troubling. And yet CDC has been right now pretty much not receptive of that information. I got back a letter from Fauci that said, no, we know of nothing that would, I have a copy of it if you want to see it. There's nothing that would suggest that it's an underlying condition. And, I think it is. If you look at, the preponderance of people who did contract COVID and how bad or poorly they did with it, we're an endemic area. And with so many people who have both, a reasonable man or woman could say, there might be a correlation here. We ought to investigate. He wouldn't do it.
Save that letter, because in 10 years, we know it's going to be very valid.
Yes,
Save all your communication.
I'd love to see that letter, and we'll share it with our community.
There's
and the
so
ticks
many
bill
things
is,
that we've heard aren't
I
correlated.
added it to the DoD bill. We added to the omnibus appropriations bill because, again, it was running into roadblocks over on the Senate side, like they often do, and we got it passed, and it's now law.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, one thing you're displaying to me right now is how important it is for parents to get involved and talk to their representatives, because you're mentioning people by name from decades ago and you remember them, and they're the ones that pushed you to make the change. So thank you for being receptive to it.
Everybody listening, if you could at least keep this in mind, there's a book by a woman named Newby who's written tremendous books. Cure Unknown was one of them, but the one that was just unbelievably incisive is called Bitten, Bitten. And it's about the correlation between our weapons development and ticks, where the pathogen, the spirochete, was being injected into ticks along with other pathogens as a way of degrading the Soviet Union. So that's how far back this goes. And it turns out that the doctor who was credited with discovering Lyme disease was a weapons expert. And Newby went and interviewed him at length. She has documentation which he shared with her. So what did I do? I introduced a bill, could not get that marked up by the Armed Services Committee, but I did offer it as an amendment to have the Inspector General of the United States of America for the Pentagon investigate our weapons work that was done with insects, especially and including ticks at Plum Island, at Fort Detrick, and elsewhere. We had enough information on these bioweapons and what they were doing that we especially from the Newby book, Bitten, and I gave copies out to people at DOD. I gave it to the Inspector General. I said, you're going to read this. People are entitled to know if they're so sick from Lyme disease and all of its, co-infections that make it even worse. They need to know if it was part of a weapons. McNamara, not McNamara. So it passed the House, went over to the Senate. I lobbied senators to try to get them to agree to it, and they gave thumbs down. So the next year, that would be last year, I introduced another amendment. This time I said, okay, if the inspector generals don't want to do it, inspectors general, we'll have the General Accountability Office do it. Now, the GAO are slow and methodical. They're good auditors. They're the watchdog of Congress. We need answers. And it passed the House, failed over in the Senate. So I'm going to do it again this year. Everyone who suffers from Lyme or has a loved one who suffers from Lyme is absolutely entitled to that information, and they're not getting it. And this goes back to the Nixon years. If you look back, and when we were looking, and of course Kennedy, but why were we? There was a book about Plum Island that I read 15 years ago before the Bitten book, and I, very well documented. And I said, this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is horrific that we're looking to degrade the civilian population of the Soviet Union as well as their military by horribly infected ticks. And a lot of them, if you look at Lyme, Connecticut, in proximity to Plum Island, the way crow flies, it's almost like directly across. And in Long Island, there were all kinds of anecdotal stories of people and animals getting sick. And of course, now in the deer, mice, and all the other population, the rodent population, it is everywhere. So did it come from bioweapons? Now, the Washington Post did a piece on this, as did others. A lot of the press just ignored it completely. And they put some junior reporter on it who did a horrible job, interviewed, and this is where, I have such respect for what you're doing. Not just because somebody has a white coat on, you say, oh, I got to listen to what he or she says. The Infectious Disease Society of America have been our nemesis on the Lyme disease in general, particularly chronic Lyme, but also on the bioweapons issue. So they interviewed one of their top guys, and I looked him up right away, on Google when I saw he was quoted. Of course, he was with the Infectious Disease Society of America. And sure enough, he just dumped on it and says this is like a conspiracy theory. I said, okay, then let's investigate. If I'm wrong, mea culpa. And I'll say, I'm glad I was wrong. It wasn't from bioweapons. But we have such an explosion of tick-borne disease. And now it's not just, because they also did Rocky Mountain fever type of things and other, what do you call it? The other kind of ticks. It wasn't just, the deer tick. My own daughter has chronic Lyme now and has dealt with it. It's very, very serious. Everybody kind of knows someone or is someone who has suffered from it. And every time we go out into the grass, high grass, you're worried about, you do a tick check on your legs, make sure there's not one lodged there. It is very serious. We need to do a lot more on it. And
Well, thank you so
on
much.
that, but I will
Thank you
always
so
do
much for doing that and staying up on it and not giving up. But something else you told us in your interview struck with me, and I
it.
wanted to talk about it. Your work advocating for the members of the military that were injured with the anthrax vaccine
Oh, sure,
requirement. Can you talk on that?
sure. The Persian Gulf mystery illness, or they had different names for it, but that was the most common. Gulf syndrome, there were all these words. They didn't know what it was, they being the Department of Defense and the VA. So they just kind of, they looked into it, came back and told us, because I had the hearings on it, that it was a result, I chaired them, of anxiety. And I said, that doesn't pass the straight face test. I have many people that I've spoken to in the military, including the one guy that was in the, what do you call it? Not the Merchant Marine, the other one, Coast Guard, U.S. Coast Guard. And, they're based right down in Wildwood. And he had a horrible case of Persian Gulf illness, was never there. So I started asking questions. Was it the anthrax vaccine and the accelerant that was put in it to make it much more, use less, but it just gets your autoimmunity on hyperdrive, or your immune system, I should say. And, I was met with looks of, no, that's not the case. I had the IOM, Institute of Medicine, and all these other people testify. They all have the same worn out phrase of that, it was mass anxiety. And I said, well, when you're not deployed in a military theater, the anxiety has to be much less quantifiable. And yet everywhere we look, it's like uniform. So I wrote a bill and it was enacted into law that provides for veterans benefits and for compensation for those who have been hurt by this anthrax, because I do believe to this day it was anthrax. They don't come clean on it, but this mystery illness. And it taught me another lesson, just like previous other times, like on Agent Orange, Tom Daschle, a Democrat, and I, a Republican, did a bill in the House Committee on Veterans Affairs in my first term. This is 1981 now, to provide service connection disability payments and medical care for those suffering from dioxin, the contaminant in the defoliant known as Agent Orange, used very extensively in Vietnam. And we lost. The DOD, the VA, other experts all weighed in and told us how there's no connection between all of these anomalies that are manifesting and Agent Orange. And we said we stopped spraying it because the local population already in Vietnam was experiencing very, very deleterious effects to their health. You know, and it's a presumptive disability. We're presuming it because we can't absolutely prove it yet. Well, 10 years later or so, by administrative action, they being the VA say, yep, we were wrong. Agent Orange does cause all of these things. Even in the bill that I did on Persian Gulf illness, I expanded the list of disabilities that need to be covered pursuant to Agent Orange contamination. It is a serious problem, and so many of our veterans have suffered from it. My own uncle flew C-130s in Vietnam. Both my brother was a fighter pilot at the end of the war, but he wasn't contaminated, but my uncle was. He died. He's buried in Arlington today and died very, very young in his mid-40s. As a result, we believe, but we could never prove it, of Agent Orange contamination because that was one of his assignments with the C-130 there.
Well, thank you so much for keeping an open mind and not just dismissing these people's concerns the way
and when these people come up and they tell you, you know, and they do it in such authoritative terms. When we had anthrax hitting right nearby in our Route 130 post office, remember Brentwood got hit and we got hit as well. CDC came up and I met with them. I'm very polite, very cordial. I respect them. And they kept telling us how no possibility of cross-contamination. I said, let's go out onto the floor, put a letter through a machine with some talcum powder in it, and you'll see a little plume. What are you talking about? This is weaponized anthrax, very, very minute particulates. And they were insistent. Well, it turns out I insisted that they investigate other post offices that were connected to this one. 4 of them were found to have cross-contamination. And my own letter carrier, who brings our mail to our office when it was then in Hamilton, he had it in his bag. And several people got cutaneous anthrax, which was very serious. They didn't get inhalation, thank God, the way they did in Washington at Brentwood, because those people died.
Wow.
But it was just like such a dismissive attitude. And they would come in and say, our recommendation is, and it's like, well, what do you know? You know, don't act so authoritative all the time when you're dealing with a half a deck or not the cards that you want all of us to believe that you have. So that has made me a healthy skeptic.
Well, thank you for that. We need healthy skeptics. We
For
consider
sure.
ourselves healthy skeptics.
We definitely do. And we appreciate that you are listening to your constituents and that you are asking questions above and beyond, you know, what information you're being handed from those people in white coats or maybe from the CDC or other governmental agencies that are maybe have another agenda to not provide the truth to the public. So we appreciate that. I want to talk to you and have you talk to our viewers about how you championed informed consent and secured a black box warning on the box of the drug Accutane. Can you talk to us about that?
Yes. A congressman named Bart Stupak, who had known for years, he and I were talking, and he was telling me how his son, I had known that, we went to his funeral, had committed suicide. And this was a very, very gregarious, well-connected. He played baseball, was a good baseball player, had a lot of friends. He wasn't isolated. You know, sometimes suicide, you know, that's one consequence of extreme isolation. He had none of that. And he went on Accutane. He did have a reasonable problem with acne, not a bad one. And all of a sudden, he got clinically depressed first, then clinically depressed. Nobody could figure out right away what it was, and then he took his own life. One of my sons was on a travel soccer team, and one of the fathers told me that his son, had used Accutane, And he went from a great soccer player to I don't want to play anymore, and a depressed young kid. Thankfully, he didn't take his life, but became very depressed. Accutane, was originally formulated for extreme acne, and dermatologists turned out to be giving it out almost like cotton candy. Anybody who wanted, to have a clear skin, don't use Clearasil, use Accutane, and they did, and so many got depressed, some killed themselves. So Bart had some imaging, brain imaging that he had a physician do, or a technician, of kids who were on Accutane, and it showed he had like 8 slides, different people, where that part of the brain where personality or emotions resides, would shrivel up, would dry out, almost like what it would do, I guess, to oil on your face or whatever, but it would have that impact. And he showed it to me. It's like every one of them had this consequence to their brain imaging for these people using Accutane. So we set up a meeting. He did. I followed him, and I was glad to be a part of it. He took the lead to meet with Tommy Thompson, who was then the HHS secretary, former governor, and he brought his whole top staff in, which was nice. And he didn't have a clue what we were talking about. Now, I say that, I don't embarrass him, but I was like, if and you're being briefed, 2 members coming in, one lost his son to suicide due to Accutane, please read a brief on it at least, and what the concerns are. But he didn't know. And we pressed very hard with the FDA, with him, with others, that you've got to put this on a black box. You got to, I don't care what the pharmaceutical company says, making all the money that they're making. We have deaths now attributable to this, and a lot of psychotic individuals who have suffered from it. And took months, but it happened. And the abuse of it, dramatically declined, and I'm sure lives were saved because of it. But it was one of those things where the facts were hiding in plain sight, even on their regular, admonishments or the information that comes with the drug. It said this may cause this, but we all become a little immune to that when every time you watch an ad for something, they always have when they're showing the happy pictures on TV. That's when they throw in some of those things. This may cause this or that or depression. So all of that was kind of in there, but it was no way highlighted. And above all, the dermatologists and dispensers were not in any way showing prudence in how they dispense of that drug. So I learned another important lesson there about, don't assume people in high places necessarily are knowledgeable. We all have to learn. I'm always learning. I'll tell you, I'll be the first one to tell you. I'm front in the queue trying to learn even more. One of the reasons why I love congressional hearings so much, and I've chaired something like 500 of them over my years, many of them on human rights and health issues, is because you always learn something. I just had my 4th hearing on the horrible practice of organ harvesting by the Chinese Communist Party. It's on my website at chrissmith.house.gov if you want to check it out. We had incredible witnesses, but the associations that are all about transplantation of organs, they've been aiding and abetting the Chinese Communist Party in what is a Nazi-like program where young people, average age, the best age for specimen is 28 years old, and they kill about 50,000 per year, maybe more, take on average 2 to 3 organs per involuntary donor because they kill them. A lot of them are political and religious prisoners, Falun Gong practitioners, Uyghurs, Catholics, Buddhists, Christians of various denominations, but people who are on the outs with the Chinese Communist Party. So I had one of the men who actually did it testify, one of the doctors, and he talked about how barbaric it was, but he actually did it. And the first one I had on this was back in 1995 at that hearing, but now it's a huge money-making apparatus, and it's like organ harvesting tourism, where people go to Shanghai and elsewhere to get their whatever it is, lung, heart, liver, and it's being donated by some young man or young woman who's being killed for their organs. I mean, this
Well,
is
if I've
right
ever
out of
heard of
Joseph Goebbels.
anything anti-medical freedom, that's pretty
Oh,
much
it's
the
you
most
can't get any more
anti-medical
medical
freedom you
freedom.
could get.
Exactly. And I have a bill in. Tom Cotton is the Senate sponsor. I'm the House sponsor. That would penalize everybody in that chain, Americans, but Chinese, whatever, who are complicit in these crimes against humanity. I can't get the bill marked up. I've been asking for it for a couple of years now, and the Democrats won't put it up for a vote. which I find appalling. Tom's having the same problem, Senator Cotton, I should say, over on the Senate side. So, here's a medical issue. If somebody wants to donate their eyes or something, and they are dead, I remember there was a website that said not dead yet. It was, don't take them when they're living. And meanwhile, I'm involved with another issue right now with the University of Pittsburgh, and just asked for the Inspector General to investigate NIH funding going to the University of Pittsburgh, where they're taking children who had been aborted and were kept very warm. We think some were even born alive. So they were newborns really. And they're taking their livers, and they brag in their documentation how Sherma, I'm not saying it right, but it's the body warmth of the body part. And they want to keep it as warm as possible. So you go closer to, they're not dead yet, in order to procure it. And when we've asked questions. So what did the University of Pittsburgh do in NIH? They had a law firm do a study commissioned by the University of Pittsburgh on this fetal tissue abuse and theft, and they say, here's it. I said, that's not. So I have another 60 members of Congress who have joined me in a letter to the Inspector General saying, you have to investigate this. This is barbaric. These children have no chance. And, if they kill them in such a way as so to procure their body part, which we found out happens frequently, that is something that is, talk about not being able to give informed consent. Well, here's another example of it. And it's happening at the University of Pittsburgh. We don't know how many other times it's happening.
Right.
And that's another point. There's so much secrecy and there's no transparency with most of this. And we've been asking, we first asked them to do it themselves. HHS wouldn't do it. Doesn't surprise me. We given the HHS secretary, Javier Becerra, couldn't care less about these things. But we hope that the Inspector General, who in principle is independent, will embark on this study.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for shining a spotlight on all of these things that seem to be hidden, right? On purpose, perhaps,
Very hidden.
Kind of swept under the rug and not spoken about so that it's not addressed. So I appreciate your work on that. So we believe that your record makes it clear that you have a long history of trying to do the right thing, regardless of who is not happy with you or who you might be going against or questioning. And you're willing to put principle over party and your constituents ahead of private interests that you've encountered in DC over your career. So we want to talk about HR 550, the Immunization Infrastructure Modernization Act of 2021 that passed the House last November. And we've spoken about this, Congressman, and a lot of people are not in favor of HR 550. And from our discussions that we are among them as well. And we have a great deal of respect for you and your willingness to engage in an ongoing dialogue on this topic and related matters as well. So can you provide some clarity around the bill and, let's talk about that.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for the question. When Joe Biden became president, he immediately pushed the American Recovery Act, which those of us on the Republican side said, whatever Trump did do with Operation Warp Speed and all the other things and PPP, the Paycheck Protection, so that small businesses wouldn't fold and they had a bridge so that they could pay their employees even when their doors were shuttered. All that said, Biden all of a sudden has to have a $2 trillion COVID bill, which was not justified. I spoke out against it, voted against it. Again, it was 1.9 trillion, but most people think with some of the other monies that were in there, it gets even closer to 2 trillion, which is with a T, 2 trillion. I mean, that is money that is just off the Richter scales. And there was a section in it, I'll just tell you, it was section 2404. It was called Funding for Data Modernization and Forecasting Center. And it provided $500 million to work on, this whole idea of immunization infrastructure. And The problem with it was it had absolutely no protections that we can find on personally identifiable information of individuals in all of our states. Our state, and I just put a parenthetic on this, monitors, and I don't agree with it, everyone who gets vaccinations. Well, my own wife went to Central State to get voluntarily the COVID-19 vaccination. They kept calling and kept saying, when is she going to get her booster? But, the phone would ring. There they are again, live person, admonishing her to go and get her booster. Who's keeping track of this? Why is that information from Central State in Freehold, New Jersey, being shared with someone who was making those phone calls? It was a bit troubling, I have to tell you. Now, the money that Biden put into the American Recovery Act, $500 million, and again, I'll give you the section again. It's 2404 of that law, and it is a law, had no guardrails whatsoever on personally identifiable information. So there was information, many of us were very concerned about that. HR 550 had specific language that said that personally identifiable information cannot, I say again, cannot be conveyed to the federal government, and any grants that go to a state have to follow that protocol. I talked to Dr. Bouchon, who is the ranking Republican on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and they do have a good website, the Republicans on Energy and Commerce, one of the bigger committees in Congress. And they make it very clear that this took us from nothing in terms of guardrails to specific language that we hope, unless they lie, maybe they will, precludes identifying individuals, taking like you or anybody who was on this call, or me or my wife, and conveying that to the CDC or any other agency of the federal government. It also had some very specific language on protecting against piracy. Now, I know how important that is. I work on piracy issues. I've done it for years with Google, Microsoft, Yahoo. I've had hearings on them and how they're so intrusive, as we all know. My wife and I are in Blue Cross Blue Shield. We were notified by Blue Cross Blue Shield that our entire, and they probably went to millions of people, health histories have been compromised, probably by the Chinese. I don't know by who, because the Chinese are constantly data fishing for all kinds of information about Americans, as we all know. But, OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, was also breached, and there was a big to-do about that a few years ago. So they're always working on better cybersecurity. Well, this bill has cyber protections in it as well. But again, what goes down to the federal government from the state is population data, not population per se, but like an aggregate. What is happening in this place or that place? And one of the things that I've seen stated about the bill, I thought was a pretty interesting part, that during the Trump administration, during Warp Speed, and as that came to fruition, it enabled a better targeting where there were higher outbreaks, where there might be a higher number of the vaccines needed. When President Trump wisely tried to help New York and give them all that information that they needed, not information, opened up beds and brought over the Mercy ship. It was all rejected by Cuomo foolishly. Instead, he sent the people back to the women and men from nursing homes back to the nursing homes where huge numbers of deaths were recorded. And I would just note parenthetically, I know you know this, but our governor, Governor Murphy, did the exact same thing within the same week. Did an executive order that said our nursing homes are going to receive, these people who are sick, and that compromises their suite mate or people, within the proximity, and the workers then carried from bed to bed. To this day, I can't believe that has not been investigated and people held to account. When that happened at the veterans facilities up in North Jersey, where there were a number of deaths attributable to the practice of sending people after the hospital or whatever back to the nursing home, in this case, a veterans nursing home, everyone was blaming Trump. And I said, time out. And I said it to my colleagues. I said, while that money comes from the federal government, it is administered by DMARVA, by the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. And that means Governor Murphy is directly responsible for that, not Donald Trump. And yet, all of a sudden, there was like a quieting of the angst. Meanwhile, all those people died, and there's never been accounting on that, which I find appalling. Still not. Why hasn't the Democrat legislature had multiple hearings, especially for the loved ones who lost people in nursing homes? Instead, they try to shift the blame to the nursing homes, wrongly, but they're under executive order by the state to do so. So the governor, I think, made many mistakes vis-a-vis this, and one of them is now this whole idea of tracking people. I'm not for that. I'm dead set against it. If people want to get the vaccination, it's voluntary with a capital V, not coercive. And I would add to that if I could. Then I'll go back to anything else you want to ask. I'm a co-sponsor of several bills that say no vaccine mandate, whether it be for private sector employment, public employees employment, nurses. I remember when everybody, including myself, were in awe, and I still am, of our healthcare professionals and their willingness to care for COVID patients. I was in many hospitals trying to get different remdesivir and all these other interventions, some of which worked, some didn't. When you would meet with these nurses and doctors, and the nurses more than anybody else, because of their proximity and the longevity of their time bedside with someone who has COVID. And there they are, out in front of Central State and several other of the hospitals. Heroes work here. No stronger and truer words have ever been said. True heroes. And then they're told, if you don't get the vaccination, you're fired. I still, I can't believe it. Many of them got COVID. They have antibodies, within their systems, which is a very efficacious way of repelling the disease, or if you get it, not getting it as badly. And yet that doesn't matter. It doesn't come into the equation. Now, I met with 8 different people in my own district who were thrown out of the military because they would not get COVID-19 vaccinations. 2 of the Marines I met with in my Plumstead office, gung-ho, they love the country, they love defending the country. They said, we put in for a medical exemption. You get it. No one's getting them. That's a big farce too. And religious, not medical, religious. And they were thrown out. What I didn't know until I heard from they and the others, was how much pressure there is within the chain of command, so that everybody looks good to the person higher up on the chain of command. The captain wants to look good, sergeant wants to look good. So the pressure on our men and women to get the vaccination is huge and totally underreported. I was out when the C-46s came into Aguirre, and we worked hard to get those new military aircraft there. The very guy that was assigned to me to make sure it's in the military, they always have an assigned person. He had gotten the vaccination, didn't want it, and got deathly sick from it.
Oh, wow.
He goes, does anybody care? My wife thought he had well over 100 fever for several days. And again, if he wanted to get it voluntarily, you weigh the risks, benefits, and it's your choice. But you don't have somebody saying you do it or else you lose. So I introduced a bill. There's 2 things. First, it says anybody who's been thrown out of the military, they're invited back exactly where they were when they left. So there's no diminution of rank or anything like that. Under our commander-in-chief now, there's not a snowball's chance in hell that'll pass. I'm going to try, but even Speaker Pelosi wouldn't even put that one up either, which I think is horrible. You wonder why people maybe be shunning the military a little bit now. They're thinking, what is this culture that's developed where we have to do this or else? You got a gun to your head. Secondly, in this case, a vaccination. The secondly part of the bill, it says that anybody who was dismissed and doesn't want to come back, rather than get a general discharge, is what they all got, not an honorable discharge, but a general, they get upgraded to honorable. Now, why does that matter? There are a whole slew of veterans benefits that are precluded, barred from anyone who has a general or less, including the GI Bill. Now, we have a number of men and women, because the GI Bill for college education is transferable. And while they might not want to go on to college or graduate work, they can give it to their kids. So it's part of the benefits package that they have earned. It's not something we're doing out of the goodness of our heart as a government. They have earned it. Sure. Many of them could have done much better somewhere else, but they love this country so much. I have one guy that's 19 years in the military, 20 before he retires. He applied for a religious exemption. And I tracked it. I talked to the adjutant general right here because I was told she has a lot to do with it. I talked to the people who, sent up his package. He's not going to get it. And his
Wow.
wife is beside herself, as is he, that
Sure.
his kids who are getting the GI Bill education benefits will now be barred from getting it. So all those years, and here's one other thing. When he was in gutter, he actually had COVID. And they were telling him he had to file his, not miss the deadline for religious exemption while he was deployed to the Middle East. And no idea, you got an extra month to do it or anything out of that. So there's a coercive attitude
Wow.
that prevails and pervades
Yes.
within the military. And I blame the commander in chief. I Commander Milley and Austin, the Secretary of Defense. They should be in favor of their people. And they should know the lessons learned from anthrax and some of these other things in the past, which they just turn the page and call it acceptable loss. How dare they do that? So I'm going to keep pushing that bill. If it doesn't get marked up as a bill on its own, and we might next year hopefully when we take control of the House, I'm going to look to offer it to the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. This is where at least I can get a vote, I think, or at least try to get a vote on the bill in order to protect these men and women in uniform. I mean, I can't tell you how distraught they are, but also their colleagues who did get the vaccination under duress.
Sure. Yeah, and that's really what this PAC advocates for is true informed consent.
Yes.
The preservation of bodily autonomy and, giving people choice regarding any medical intervention, especially one that has unknown long-term risks.
Exactly.
Because, we're asking the military to really sacrifice themselves, or like the gentleman that you're referring to, is going to be stripped of his future and the future for his children.
The GI
and
Bill,
all
I
those
mean, the GI
benefits.
Bill is the greatest benefit we've ever afforded
Sure.
men and women in uniform. It came out right after the World War. It's what led to the middle class because people who go to college, they got a home loan. They were the two major features of it. Now you're told there's the door. You can't use it anymore. And you've paid into it. There's a contributing. It's very minor, but it's a benefit that they've earned, and now they're being dispossessed of that important benefit. It's terrible.
Well, thank you. Thank you for standing up for them and for being a voice for them, because we need representatives like yourself who are going to go against the grain and really stand up for your constituents and for people who are being coerced to participate in what I consider an experimental medical intervention.
Exactly. And I'm glad you mentioned experimental because, I'm not for the childhood vaccination. Pediatric testing, how robust has it been? And, who were the guinea pigs there? When a group at NIH meets or FDA, when they meet, it's 10-0 or 15-0. What are their affiliations? Who are these people?
Right.
If you look at the revolving door coming out of NIH and other high-ranking people, Gottlieb went from FDA commissioner to a high-stakes, very lucrative position. I think he's at Merck now, one of the top pharmaceuticals. So it does raise those questions too about a revolving door.
Yes.
And I find that there should be a moratorium of 10 years or never. If you work in this area where the pharmaceuticals could influence you on a decision, you don't go work for them later on.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. That's something we've been drawing attention to for many years. So thank you for acknowledging that and recognizing that revolving door really is a slippery slope for sure. I do want to bring you back to HR 550 because I know one of the rumors and possible misconceptions about the bill is that it creates a national federal level database.
Right.
And you and I have spoken about, and with the board, that even in reviewing the bill myself, it seems as if it is to enhance and become a funding source for the already existing registries in each of the states. So let's talk about that.
Well, a funding source with conditionality on it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to receive one of those grants, and it's not passed the Senate yet, but if you are to receive one of those grants, personally identifiable information, your name and your vaccination history cannot be conveyed to the federal government. Now, a group that might have had, say I'm in Cold Snacks right now, if Cold Snack had a real problem with fill in the blank sickness, the prevalence of that sickness in the aggregate could be conveyed to try to figure out, what's going on there. And I think that's prudent. But I am adamantly opposed. And I did talk to Dr. Bouchon, who was the Republican lead during the debate. There were only a couple of people who spoke on it. And interestingly enough, not a single person spoke against HR 550 on the floor of the House. Not one. So I think there's been a great deal of misinformation. I'm sure it was well-meaning that some people put some of this stuff out. But again, and I can't say it enough, we went from a $500 million Biden bill, and that is the American Recovery Act, to do just this, but with no guardrail saying personally identifiable information cannot be conveyed. So, they were there. Hey, they put their hands in their pockets and say, hey, we can do this now. There's nothing that says we can't. Now, this bill lowered it to $400 million. This is reprogramming money. This money is already appropriated. It's already there. So it actually cuts it by $100 million, but the money is already there. And so to do that, I think is maybe could have been cut even more. I don't know. I wasn't involved with that part of the negotiation, but I have talked to Dr. Bouchon. I've talked to others on the Energy and Commerce Committee on the Republican side. And I asked him especially, if we take control of the House, we have to have vigorous oversight hearings to ensure that some bureaucratic gone rogue is not doing this kind of thing, despite the plain language of the law, I should say. And that is so important because I've been around here long enough that for some people, the law doesn't matter. And I can give an example. Wherever you come down on the right to life issue, and I'm very pro-life, wherever you come down on it, conscience protections are important. You should not be compelled to participate in an abortion if that's, if you're not in favor of it, certainly. We had a doctor from Mount Sinai, a nurse from Mount Sinai Medical Center, who was told on condition of losing her job, and I've met her, she's an amazing woman, but heartbroken that she buckled under the pressure. She had to do a second trimester dismemberment abortion and had to put the child back together again and ensure all parts were taken out. She was broken by it. She kept her job, then she quit in disgust, kept her job. We had nurses here in New Jersey who had the same thing. Now, here's what happened. During the 8 years of the Obama administration, there was no enforcement of conscience protections. We have multiple laws that protect conscience. Probably the most important one is named after David Weldon, a Florida congressman, who did a absolutely clear statement about what, you got the right to say, I don't want to be a part of this. And they didn't enforce the law for 8 years. So what we need to do going into next year, despite the plain language in HR 550 about no personally identifiable information, is to bear down hard on the administration to make sure that that's not happening. None of that's happening. It's not law. It hasn't passed the Senate, probably won't. But we want to make sure with the $500 million that he got, that they're not doing this, because that's out there freer to be abused than other spigots of funds anywhere else in the budget. They can do whatever they want, pretty much. So we have to have oversight hearings. It's not going to happen under the Democrats in the House. Frank Pallone's not going to have an oversight hearing on that. He chairs the Energy and Commerce Committee. He's just not going to do it. But we will on the Republican side. And I've already asked them, Bouchon and others, if they would do it. We're also going to see if any other language is needed. You could be crystal clear, but then you got to be even more crystal clear about, no, there will be huge penalties. When HIPAA was done, there were huge penalties meted out for those who would share privacy information pursuant to the HIPAA law. And that was Dr. Archer, the Ways and Means Committee. They always credited with Ted Kennedy. It was Archer that wrote that law. And what was behind that was to protect privacy. So the sharing of personally identifiable information among, is very well guarded. And if you give your informed consent to share it, that's one thing. That's fine. But otherwise, you can't. And
well, I want to take this time.
Criminality.
I want to take this time to draw your attention to, and the attention of our viewers, to the fact that New Jersey has a database that captures vaccine information. So it's called the New Jersey Immunization Information System. It's a similar system throughout the country. So if anyone watching was born after 1998 in the state of New Jersey, you're likely listed on the NJIIS system. And if recently you've had a baby in the state of New Jersey, your baby is automatically enrolled onto this registry when you apply for a birth certificate in the state of New Jersey. And in 2011, all practitioners in the state of New Jersey were mandated to send childhood vaccine information, if you administer vaccines to 7 and under, to this registry. So your child's vaccine schedule is being shared with this registry, regardless of whether you know about it or have given informed consent to be on this list. You're automatically enrolled onto this list. This is only an opt-out registry in the state of New Jersey. And what we saw during COVID was on December 4th, 2020, Governor Murphy signed an executive order that enrolled every person who received the COVID vaccine, adults, to be enrolled onto this registry that was originally focused primarily on children in the state of New Jersey. But with this expansion with this executive order, now adults were being automatically enrolled onto this registry. And, you know, this is very much concerning because now they are expanding this registry in the state of New Jersey. And just this week, I'm going to bring up a photo, Congressman. Assemblyman Conaway put up this bill, and this bill would seek to expand the use of NJIIS, the registry, to automatically include adults upon any vaccination that they receive in the state of New Jersey. And my concern about this bill that Conaway has now introduced is that the parameters listed in the bill, if you can take a look at the bill, I'm going to read it directly so I'm not getting anything incorrect. What's on the screen is a screenshot of the bill. And what I want to draw everyone's attention to is that this bill would allow for access to this information, this registry information, shall be limited to, quote unquote, healthcare providers, schools, colleges, licensed child care centers, public agencies, and private organizations as determined by the regulation of the commissioner. So this is a huge red flag for myself and many of you probably watching, that this type of bill is being introduced, A, and B, that it allows for so many people, so many varieties of people throughout the state to have access to this private medical information, your school, your local health department, licensed child care centers. So this really opens up this private medical information to so many more people. And I hope that, let me hide that you all understand that there is a registry here and that this expansion of it with this much access to it and not having guardrails and not really being confidential is very, very much alarming. So Congressman Smith, as we're coming out of this 2-year period where data collection on vaccination, as you've alluded to, has prevented people from, their military careers, other careers, healthcare professionals, people being wrongly discharged, students unable to attend colleges of their choice, just Americans unable to visit theaters or restaurants throughout the country, all due to this data collection around a vaccination status. So how can we ensure that data collection on the state level, in conjunction with the funding of HR 550, will not perpetuate these losses of freedom and coercion going forward?
Well, first of all, and thank you for that very good information about that proposal. I think it's outrageous, and I hope it can be stopped. It does underscore the need for why we need a new governor and why the legislature needs to be flipped. I mean, these things are happening not in a vacuum. Years ago, I remember people used to say, oh, there's no difference between the parties. Yeah, there's a huge difference between the parties. And we do believe in, individual freedom and protection of those rights, where the other side is not as likely to do so. And these are very egregious examples of where they are willing to trample over those rights. So I think our legislators at the state level need to be very robust in their condemnation of this initiative. And we got to make sure that, again, right now, the American Recovery Act, $500 million for grants passed by Biden and every Democrat, has no guardrails on it, unlike HR 550. And that would preclude funding anything like this. Clear as a day. And if they didn't, we would have to make a very severe argument, and it would be a severe one, about how they're breaking the law. And that would be to the administration and to IGs and the like. There's always a problem with what is the penalty. With HIPAA and other things, there are some really good, strong penalties. Some of these things don't have enough in terms of penalty for bureaucrats who break it. And again, this would be the federal dollars part that we're talking, flowing into New Jersey. But right now, under the Biden 500 million, I'm repeating myself, potentially more of this mischief can be done because there's nothing to stop it. So that's why we do need this. That's why the Republicans on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and division of labor is an important thing in Congress. I'm a great believer in committee hearings. I'm a great believer in the fact that we have committees that divide up jurisdictions. Kathy McMorris Rogers is our ranking member. If we win the House, she'll be our chair. She's of Energy and Commerce. She's an amazing lawmaker. Dr. Burgess from Texas, in like manner, amazing lawmaker. Dr. Bouchon, another doctor, just really good, smart people that do believe in personal freedom. And they're not for mandates either. And so we will have the ability at least to aggressively oversight and hold him to account. But it also means that when they go through a bill, like they did with 550, and they vet it the way they did. Matter of fact, it was Bouchon's one of his major ideas to begin with, a Republican, that there's just nothing there on the American Recovery Act. Also, Biden can do a great deal of mischief. So right now, without this, he can do whatever he wants, pretty much. I guess there's some limitation somewhere, but it's hard to say. So I think we need to realize, and I know you know it, that's why you got a PAC, that who is elected does matter. And I think the more assertive we all become, the better. I've been doing it all my life, taking on causes. I did it with the atomic veterans. We had a woman in Asbury Park whose husband was killed or died from a non-smoking lung cancer attributable to plutonium. He was on the USS McKinley when Operation Wigwam was done, where they were detonating plutonium bombs under the sea. And our sailors were out there in these little plastic suits, and you can even YouTube it and watch some of it, soaking wet with plutonium, laced water. And so many of them died from terrible cancers. He did in his 40s. Well, I tried for 10 years, a couple of pieces of legislation, and got almost nowhere. At the end of the 10-year period, we got his widow some compensation, but he's buried. He was on, like I said, the USS McKinley. I learned all about him through his wife, who was so devoted and so heartbroken, and then doubly heartbroken by her governments. Now, I think I might have mentioned this the other day when I spoke to you, but Robert McNamara, who became the president of the World Bank, he was Kennedy's defense secretary, you might recall. He's one who ordered those detonations and those atomic tests. And so I invited him to testify. I kept asking him over and over again, tell us why. What did you do? Did you not know there would be these horrible consequences? And he would never even acknowledge that we were talking to him. Here he is, the big McGaff at the World Bank based in Washington, D.C. And I couldn't even get an answer out of him. So, no matter how big they are, when they do terrible deeds, they need to be held to account. And that was one of them. Let me just say one brief thing, too, and then I'll go back to any other questions. Tony Fiore contacted me. We were actually going door to door in Middletown. And I have been my entire life very focused on the World Health Organization. And it's increasingly dictatorial, might be too strong of a word, but maybe not. Very top-down type of of orders that come out of them, almost like when CDC says something, everybody goes, "Woo." Where's the challenge? If your doctor says you have something, sometimes you get a second opinion or even a third. Well, with these bureaucrats, we need to do it as well. Well, he was telling me, and I followed up on it immediately, that Biden had hidden the ball really well with some new amendments for the World Health Assembly that was coming up in a week and a half from there, from when I was talking to him, for the 2005 International Health Regulations. Those regulations convey a lot of power to the World Health Organization to declare emergencies and to suggest a response, whether it be a certain kind of drug or intervention, whatever it might be, whether it's Ebola or whatever the disease or sickness might be. An enormous amount of power. But it's all held in check by the fact, under current rules, the country has to agree. They have to be partners. WHO can't come in and say, hey, America, you need lockdowns, or you need this, or you need that. No, we get to choose that ourselves, and hopefully we'll choose wisely, but we don't get told by a bureaucrat somewhere in Switzerland, Geneva, telling us what to do. Now, we know what the World Health Organization did vis-a-vis the pandemic. A guy named Dr. Tedros from Ethiopia, he was their former health minister, and I know him. I visited with him in Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, and I visited him here in Washington, or not Washington now, in Colts Neck, but I visited with him several times in D.C., often argue with him. He fronted for a dictator named Meles, who killed people on the streets when the elections didn't go his way. But China, at the UN, got him his seat as Director General of the World Health Organization. There was another candidate who was all into reform and transparency. That man was thrown over the side, and Tedros got the job. So when the pandemic began in Wuhan, Tedros put out all kinds of disinformation, talked about, he and other WHO personnel, how completely, if I read you the quote, you wouldn't believe it, completely transparent, and how we need to model ourselves after the Chinese Communist Party's response to the pandemic. It wasn't called that then, but to the virus, COVID-19. It was sickening, but he did it. Well, I wrote an op-ed for the Asbury Park Press, which they published. I got a number of responses that were very harsh against me, but I don't care, because I was telling the truth. Tedros, Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping says, do this, jump, and he says, how high? That's the kind of because they gave him his job, and here's a guy that should not have been in that position. He just got renewed for another 5 years. So, and even the investigation that WHO did into origins of the Wuhan virus was a complete farce. So just so you know, another thing that I did, and it failed for now, I offered an amendment. I introduced a bill and offered an amendment during a markup in the Foreign Affairs Committee. I offered this amendment that said that we will empower Americans who have been hurt or had loved ones die from COVID-19 to sue the Chinese Communist Party in federal courts. The template for that bill, I took it right from what we did towards Saudi Arabia. It's called JASTA, the name of the bill or the law. It's the only law that was vetoed by Obama, but we overrode it in the House and the Senate during his 8 years. And it gives the ability to sue Saudi Arabia for 9/11, because many of their agents were very much involved with it. And it says, how dare they evade all accountability and hopefully even prosecution for their horrific deeds. So I took that, applied it to COVID-19, offered it as an amendment in the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, had a very rigorous debate, and in a total party line vote with Malinowski, Kim, and Malinowski and Kim, all the Democrats voted no on allowing every American who wants to do an action against the Chinese Communist Party to have access to our federal courts. It waives what we call the Foreign Immunities Clause, just like we did with Saudi Arabia, so we could at least get discovery about what happened. Because they just close their doors, everybody turns around, and nothing happens. And now they don't even talk about it anymore. Part of the order.
Well, thank you so much for standing up for America.
So now I'm going to reoffer that amendment, and we take control. I will offer it again as a bill, and hopefully we get a majority vote for it. There's been a whitewash of Chinese Communist Party's crimes, but I bring it up because of WHO. Because now, under the new Biden regulations that they failed at the World Health Assembly, and this is so important for your organization to be involved with this. I know you are, I guess, but even more so. And that is, he would have made it so the WHO itself, World Health Organization, would have exclusive domain to declare an emergency and prescribe a response. So if WHO says to America, we may say we don't want to listen to you, but a lot of the developing world, a lot of other countries that are relying on foreign aid, particularly in the medical area, will be cowed by it. Well, they'll end up saying, okay, I have to do it, even though we don't agree with what WHO is saying we have to do. It's a power that an unelected bureaucrat like Tedros and all the others should never have. There's no checks or balances. Zero. Biden lost. What's her name? Joe Fox News had me on the show. I was invited when we brought this to the attention of Fox News. Laura Ingraham invited me to come on her show. We have it if you ever want to take a look at it, to talk about what Biden was trying to do. And Tucker did a piece on it. Laura did a big piece on it. And Biden lost over at the World Health Assembly. He got one small amendment about limiting the time that countries can review any changes in these regs from 18 months to 6. But the big win was that he lost. Now, here's what is very serious for your organization, for me, for my family, for every American. There's a treaty that's being proposed with enforcement capability to have the WHO decide when there's a national health emergency or a global or regional, giving that power to the Director General of the WHO. And secondly, to leave exclusively up to them how the response has to be. And that
Pure
is
insanity.
it's a terrible treaty proposal. The European Union has already said they want it. Biden wants it. His State Department wants it. And I'm fighting it like it.
We don't want it. Well, thank you. We need somebody to stand up for us. That's not a good idea. They're not elected. They shouldn't be able to tell us what we have to do with our bodies. But thank you I know we went over, and I appreciate you coming on a day before the primary. Thank you so much. It's been great having you. And
Thank you.
we'll just wrap it up. I have one last 20-second question. What does health freedom mean to you?
The ability of a man or woman, or and parents on behalf of their children, to prescribe a course going forward to provide the best possible health and well-being of their loved one or themselves, to be informed, to not have government bureaucrats in the position of telling them this is what you will do. They can make recommendations, but that's it.
Thank you so
freedom.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's been great having you. We look forward
Thank you so
to
much.
working with you more. And thank you so much. I'll let you go,
Thanks for
and
having me on.
I'll wrap
Appreciate
it
it.
up. Thank you so much.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day. So we hope it's clear by now why NJPHIPAC has decided to endorse Congressman Smith on his upcoming primary election tomorrow, June 7th. It's not only advantageous, but imperative for us to have strong representation for New Jersey and our country. Our future and our children's future depends on it. We mentioned earlier that the success of the PAC relies on contributions from individuals like you. Being a grassroots organization, we are by the people and for the people. Unlike the pharmaceutical giants who have millions at their disposal, the PAC's efforts are a show of people, not just dollars. What we have is a movement of thousands whose passion is to preserve the right that cannot be bought or contained. In the eyes of legislators, contributions to the PAC equals voters, and that is a currency that money can't buy. Every contribution to the PAC shows that the legislators, that we are a voting bloc and our concerns should be taken very seriously. To become a PAC contributor, please visit our website at www.njphipac.org and make a contribution today. No amount is too small. Thank you again for joining us this evening, and we'll see you the next time on the PAC Chat. And get out to vote tomorrow, primaries. Thank you. Our voting guide is also up on our website. Have a great day, everyone.